रमणीय जटा कलापम गौरी निरंतर विभूषित वाम भागम नारायण प्रियमनंग मदापहारम वाराणसी पुरपतिम भज विश्वनाथ. Dr. Murli Madhavan and all the Vidwans, I hope I am audible. There is no problem with my sound.
Audible.
Yes. I am extremely grateful to Professor Murli Madhavan and the Kantoorshala to give me the great honor of addressing you people. With your permission, here that I have such great scholars, artists, poets, and diligent students and teachers, with your permission, I would like to express a few things that keep crossing my mind and about which I think all the time whenever I think of Natyashastra. It is in the spirit of sharing my thoughts that I present them before you. Natyashastra, of course, is the Apta Vakya or the Apta, the first Grantha available for Natya. This Bharata, of whom we have the Shat Sahasri, 6,000 verses, was preceded, as tradition has it, by Vriddha Bharata, who wrote the Dwadash Sahasri, something which was twice as big, a Natyashastra, which is not available. And then there is the tradition of so many other dramaturgical works for another 2,500 years. I have dated Bharat Muni and this present text as belonging to 5th century BC. To my mind, it closed around that time. And I have given my arguments in my book, Dramatic Concepts, Greek and Indian, a very detailed account as to why I think. And you may sometime like to have a look at them, those arguments. But it is incontestable that a large number of texts were written after Natyashastra, right till the 18th century or so, and smaller works were written, and perhaps hundreds of smaller works have been lost. Now, why is it that in the field of Natya we have such a large number of texts? I mean, we have Shastras of different kinds, but in other Shasanas, in other disciplines, for instance, let us say the Artha Shastra, we have only Artha Shastra plus Chanakya Niti and a couple others works. But in the field of music and dance, we have dozens and dozens, and at least 25 or 30 of them stand out, and they are huge. So why is it that this kind of a phenomena is to be seen? The answer is very simple. All the Shastras were meant for the practical art. They were not meant for scholarly study only. Shastram iti shasanopayam. Shastra is something that governs a discipline, that provides for a discipline. Not that it lays down rules for a discipline, but that it observes what is happening out there in that particular field, in that particular lakshya, in that art, and then it gives the lakshana of the art. So the simple answer to the question, why are there so many texts on music and dance and theatre, is very simple. Because this has been a great tradition, a living tradition, for thousands of years in our culture, and so it was thought necessary to go on adding the lakshanas. You add them according to certain formats, just as you play according to certain tradition, just as you perform and sing and dance according to certain tradition, but you always do something new. There is always some kind of a chamatkara done by a great artist in every age, and if there is a shastrakar around, if the shastrakar sees it, it is his duty to record that as a lakshana of the art in his time. So that is why you see a big variety when you compare the music and dance and natya in Natyashastra, then in Brihaddeshi, then in later texts like Sangeeta Parijat, and finally Ratnakar, and then the later texts. So you can see a record of the major changes that have taken place. Now, what is most important is to see how this kala, this science, this vidya, Natya Vidya, has been growing and transforming according to the conditions in which it had to survive. It seems that till 10th century AD, there was a very dynamic and a widely practiced tradition of theatre which could be called an all India theatre. You see, the Natyashastra, not only the Natyashastra, but even Abhinav Bharati, which is 10th, 11th century, which describes the immense variety of theatre of the country. And just as a little while ago it was mentioned that there were several rupakas and natakas and loka natakas, and Abhinav Gupta mentions Dombika, etc., and gives a very detailed description of the new art forms. These art forms were being invented constantly and they were being recorded. But they were all following certain fundamentals. It is very important to understand what are those fundamentals. And those fundamentals are certainly given in Bharat Muni's Natyashastra. And once we see and understand and grasp those fundamentals, then we'll be able to see how this continuity has been there and how this continuity will lead to new frontiers in the future. It will lead to new kinds of rupakas, it will lead to new kinds of prayogas in different ways with new technology, and it will give us the same appreciation and the depth and the ecstasy of rasa. Now, sometimes we get a little too concerned with either the number of rasas or with the kind of rupakas and their classification. As a matter of fact, when in the 6th chapter, Bharat Muni enumerates that there are 11 essential elements of theatre. You know, certain Natya Tattva, he doesn't call them Tattva, he just says these are features of Natya Sangraha. So he says the Natya Sangraha consists of Rasa, Bhav, Abhinaya. Rasa, Bhava hi Abhinaya, Dharmi, Vritti, Privrittaya, Siddhi, Swara, Akodyam, Ganam, Rangascha Sangraha. So these are the 11 elements. Rupak is something which is constantly renewed, because Rupak is not dependent on a given sociological condition in a given time. For instance, in the time of Bharat Muni, 3000 years ago or 2500 years ago, there was a kind of society, there was a kind of Bharatiya Samaj, a kind of All India National Theatre, patronage, etc. And there were certain social classes according to which the Dash Rupakas were made, or they were evolved. But as time changed, other came in. How? Because Rupakas are dependent on 4 fundamental vrittis: the Kaishiki vritti, the Aravati vritti, the Satvati and the Bharati. Now that's very clearly mentioned. So you can always create new Rupakas by making a combination of the vrittis. Yatha tatha vritti bhedai dash rupa bhavanti. Now he gives the example from music. Jatibhi shudhibhischaiva yatha swaraha gramatvam agataha tatha vritti bhedai dash rupa bhavanti. So just as Shruti and Gram, they change according to the Shruti. If there is an Apkrishta Shruti, Apkrishta Pancham, then it will turn into Madhyam Gram. If it is a pure Pancham, Utkrishta Pancham, then it will be Shadja Gram. So he takes the example from music. Jatibhi Shrutibhischaiva Swaraha Gramatvam Agata Yatha Tatha Vritti Bhedai Dash Rupa Bhavantihi. So Vritti Bhed makes the Rupakas. Now the Vrittis are 4. They are fundamental to human psychology. And new Rupakas could be made, can be made, should be made according to the choice of the time. So this is the way in which the Shastra is to be approached. You have to see the fundamentals. Ras, of course, is the fundamental, because that is the Parakashtha. And that there is no meaning without rasa. Nahi rasadrite kaschid arthaha pravartate. Nothing is meaningful without rasa. All theatre is for rasa. All natya is for rasa. But the difference between sthai and the vyabhichari rasa can also alter according to the times. And this is what has happened. Before Bharat Muni, before Abhinav Gupta, although it was stated earlier by some acharyas, but Abhinav Gupta was so deeply engrossed in his philosophical system of Shanta, of Apurva, according to his Prativigya, that he thought that was the ultimate. And so he made almost an arop of his philosophy, almost an imposition of his philosophy to the practical art of theatre. And he postulated Shantarasa. And then once he opened the door, then we had Madhura Rasa, then we had Vatsalya Rasa, and you can have all kinds of rasa according to your need as to which bhava you want to prioritize and which you think is important for your age, for your audience. So this is not a closed system. This is a very open system. Now I come to my very fundamental and preliminary question. How can Natyashastra be useful for revival of present day Indian theatre? Of course it can be useful, and it has proved useful for even European and Western theatre. That is why in the 20th century several people like Richard Schechner and Grotowski and Eugenio Barba, they all came and they studied the Natyashastra and saw the theatre, particularly in Kerala. That's where they spent a lot of time. So it has been useful to Europeans also. And somebody is just now sending me a book recently written by a Russian theater theorist who is trying to prove that even Stanislavski had heard about the rasa theory, and he had thought about the rasa system, and that's how he evolved his system. So it is indisputable that Natyashastra has had a great impact. But the practical question is that how is it that today it can help revive our modern Indian theatre, or how the practice of Indian theatre has happened. Now let me talk about a bit of history. You see, till 10th century in India, theatre was their independent art. It was done in the city. It was done by great traveling companies, the Mahanatas, who came from different parts of India, who traveled across the country and who performed in a town. There was a festival, and you all know as scholars that it used to be a 10-day or a 15-day festival, and a theatre house had to be constructed, and it had to be a new theatre house each time, just as you make a yagya mandap or a vivaha mandap. Similarly, in the Vedic parampara, you made a natya mandap, and then after the performance it was pulled down. That's why it was not made in stone, it was made only in bamboo and wood and other little temporary things. So this was the great tradition which was practiced. But with the arrival of Islam, what happens is a great change takes place. And the change is very different. In most of North India, the city theatre was prohibited. It could not be there because Islam does not allow theatre. Natya went into temples, wherever temples had survived. That's why it survived most in the south and Odisha, not in Delhi or Haryana or even Kashmir after a while. It survived in temples, ashramas and various other new art forms or new rupakas, so to speak. And then in the 19th century, there was a revival of Indian theatre through the agency of the British. The British, of course, brought in the European theatre. Shakespeare was the model, and plays were performed in Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. And we had an entirely different form of theatre, which was the European form of theatre. So in the city, after almost 800 to 900 years, theatre was revived by the British. But then city theatre became European theatre or Western theatre. Traditional Indian theatre, the theatre of the tradition of Natyashastra, continued outside the cities. It came only, on small visits, just as it comes today when Sangeet Natak Academy invites somebody from Kerala to perform in Delhi. So it came as a guest, but it did not come as theatre of the people. Theatre of the people survived either in temples like Ramattam, Krishnattam, etc., Kathakali, Kudiyattam, or it survived in different folk forms. Now to this day, we have this schizophrenia in Indian theatre. On one side we have the Western model. Our playwright from 20th century onwards, early 20th century onwards, are writing in the city theatre following the tradition of the West. And on the other side we have the traditional theatre. There have been in the past 20-30 years many attempts to bring the two together, to make some sort of a unified theatre. Remember, here I'm not talking of mixing different kinds of styles. I'm not talking of the sort of invention that Uday Shankar did. You know, Uday Shankar did an invention by mixing existing styles. But here I'm talking of bringing together the European style realistic theatre along with the traditional theatre. Now, many experiments have happened, many art forms have been created, but so far you cannot claim that a new form of modern Indian theatre which incorporates the European tradition as well as the ancient tradition has come into existence. So this is the practical situation. There is theatre of the European kind, and then there is theatre of the traditional kind. So if you have to talk in any meaningful terms, if you have to talk in any meaningful terms of continuity of the Bharatamuni tradition, or the tradition, whether you call it Bharat Muni or Sharangadev or Rama Matya or whatever later, if you have to talk of that tradition, then it is the traditional theatre which has to bring out new forms of rupakas. It has to create certain forms, it has to create certain rupakas which are capable of being performed before the city audience as well as the village audience. I am sure you will all agree that the audience has also undergone a massive change in all these years. There is a very big change that has happened. Even in villages, we don't have people who can see a traditional theatre for a very long time. I mean, it was about almost 40 years ago that I came to several times to Thiruvananthapuram and saw Ramattam being performed. I stayed for almost a month in the temple. Now that art is hardly performed. Once in a while it is performed. So the audience has changed, the art form and the tradition has changed, but in spite of all that and in spite of its shrinking, it is still there as a very distinct tradition which harks back, which uses the same techniques which were used 2000 years ago and which were enshrined in the Natyashastra. So my question is, how do we try to create contemporary rupakas in which we take traditional styles of Angik, Vachik and Sattvic Abhinay? You see, unless you take these traditional modes, techniques of Angik Abhinay, Sattvic Abhinay, Vachik Abhinay, not just Aharya, because it's easy to put on Aharya. We easily put on a traditional Aharya, like a Bharatnatyam dancer or a Kuchipudi or a Kathakali. But the most difficult thing is to perform Sattvic and Angik for a new Rupaka, for a new form. Now that is the great question. So how is it that we can find certain art forms useful? Now here I am giving some suggestions. One of the forms which survived till very late, which was the most resilient forms from ancient times out of the Dashrupaka, was Prahasana. I think prahasanas were written even till 100 years ago, even in Sanskrit, by different people. And although they were hardly performed, but the scholars just wrote them and circulated them privately. But prahasana is one thing which can be used to revive and portray a contemporary reality. As a matter of fact, one of my disciples, she is a theatre person, a playwright. She writes in Western style as well. But she wrote a prahasana called Padma Shri Prahasana, where she makes fun of those people who run after Padma Shri. They forget their art, they forget how to pursue something serious with a kind of upasana, but they just run for name and fame. So she wrote a very, very contemporary play on that theme, and it uses all the old techniques of the ancient prahasanas, where you have a clown-like character or you have a professorial character. So those techniques are used, but they are again adjusted to modern life, because characters have to come from modern life, and a new prahasana is made. There can be prahasanas on an umpteen number of themes. As a matter of fact, humor and the role of the Vidushak has been a very dynamic role in all kinds of traditional forms. And the Vidushak is there in different art forms even to this day, particularly in the north, in Bhan and various other swang. He has a very prominent place, and even in the traditions of the south. So a whole play, a prahasana. Similarly, plays can be written which talk about the sexual life of modern times, and they can draw upon what was an ancient rupaka called bhan. You know, bhan is the traditional rupaka in which a prodigal goes around the town having fun with courtesans, sometimes not paying them, etc., etc. Now you can contemporize it. You can give it contemporary characters. You can use innovative costume. You can use the character of the Bhan as a new kind of a character who is half modern, half traditional, who is more of a theatre reality than a realistic play reality. And all this can lead to the production of a new. Similarly, if you take the format of certain old plays, they can be rewritten. You know, the older plays like Samavakar, which talked about different levels of consciousness, that is the Dev and the Danavas, they can also be contemporized and written. Now this is one way of making Natyashastra contemporary, using the ancient techniques of rupakas and to create new rupakas. Because what you have to do is to look at the four vrittis. How much Kaishiki vritti can come into your production, how much Satvati, how much Bharati. And how do you use music in order to create Kaishiki vritti and Angik abhinay in your new art form. Once you have a hang of it, then you are able to create a new Rupaka. Remember, the fundamental thing about theatre is that it is Drishya and Shravya. See, the whole art was given at behest of Indra by Brahma, because Indra said that Kridaniyakam ichhamo yat shravyam cha drishyam bhavet. Something which is to be seen and heard at the same time. Now, as long as you keep that together, not only can you make new stories on stage, you can use new technology on stage also. Very often people ask me that there was no electricity in ancient times. Should we use it or not? Now, such questions are asked only if we don't understand what is the fundamental principle. The fundamental principle is very clear, that there it has to be Shravya. And if it has to be Shravya, then it can only be through modern technology. It cannot be through the ancient technology. So technology comes into theatre, and everything which is visual, everything which is drishya, can become incorporative of technology, which means all kinds of virtual images, all kinds of things. So theatre is an art, and Natyashastra can be used to create all those things on stage today. For instance, if you want, you can create some fantastic figures entirely out of modern technology, background visual effect, and they can also become part of the acting. So as long as you have that principle in your mind, and as long as you are taking a event or a story which belongs to the modern life, you can create theatre in the ancient manner with all these effects. Now, the next most important question that I wish to address is something different. This is about not just acting or about performance, but this is about the social conditions. You see, Natyashastra gives us a very fundamental idea that Natya is a system of knowledge, that it is a Pancham Ved. Many people think that it's a Pancham Ved because some people wanted to elevate the Brahmins and to elevate the Vedic Brahmins especially, and so they said that okay, we will make it associated with the earlier four Vedas so that it gets some kind of a pedigree. But the pedigree or the inheritance is not the question. In my several lectures which are available on the internet, on my YouTube channel, you can see that I have given a very practical description as to how the techniques used in Vedic yagyas got transformed into the creation of some very fundamental notions of Angik, Vachik and Satvik Abhinay. As a matter of fact, I have even mentioned that it is through Natya that Murti Puja or worship of the Vigraha came into existence. The whole process is very well mentioned or shown in the 4th chapter of the Natyashastra through Pindi Bandhas. And I have published a paper which you may sometime like to read and see how this process took place. So, just as from the Vedic Yagya, theatre evolved, and theatre evolved for what was ancient India at that time. Similarly, theatre can evolve into modern India. The characters will be different, but you can see almost a direct correspondence with all the ancient characters. You see, in the ancient plays, If you have kings, then you have a ruling class today. If you have fighters, then you have fighters of different kind, democratic and non-democratic today. If you have courtesans, then you have similar characters today. If you have entertainers of ancient times, you have pretty much the entertainers of the modern times who correspond with them. So all those characters which are described in the 24th and 25th chapter, where they describe the Angik Sajja or the Nepathya and then the characters. The characters in new forms are available. It's just a matter of imagination. And then Natyashastra would again come into a very big use for us today, because it will be able to supply the interrelationship of the ancient characters in the same manner as it used to be in ancient times and as it can be now for the modern relationships. So Natyashastra, in terms of character portrayal, in terms of making new genres, in terms of choosing stories and corresponding stories to the modern times, is a very practical text. The next thing that I wish to mention is music. The European music, tradition of music, the European tradition of theatre is largely realistic acting and body movement which does not correspond to the rhythm of music. It is not closely related to music. As a matter of fact, in Europe, they created two forms. One was drama in the 16th century, 15th, 16th century, and the other was what is now called ballet, that dance form. So they made a split, but this kind of a split never happened in India. And because it did not happen in India, the traditional theatre is from where things can evolve. I can give you some very practical example of how the new art forms can come into existence using some of the contemporary traditional forms. For instance, I'll give now a practical example. I have seen several productions of so-called ancient Sanskrit dramas. Now, of course, as you all know, ancient drama was only partially in Sanskrit, it was largely in Prakrit. And I'll come to that when I would say that how it helps us to revive modern theatre. And it can, certainly. I'll talk about that. But for the moment, I'm going to talk about relationship between Angik, Satvik, Abhinay and the Vachik as it existed in ancient times. But as we have forgotten how to use it, and we are using it in a very limited way in our traditional art forms like Bharatnatyam or Kuchipudi or other. One of the things that happened over a period of time in Indian theatre was that the Vachik was taken away from the Nata. So, somebody very normally dances an Ashtapadi of Jaidev, but she does not sing the Ashtapadi. For singing the Ashtapadi, there is somebody else, or there is a group, there is a vocalist who, along with musicians, is sitting on the side stage and performing in consonance with the dance. Now, this split happened because the ancient theatre got converted into temple dance. When it got converted into temple dance, then this split happened. But before the split, it was the actor who would sing out the dialogue. The dialogue was not spoken in conversational terms. It was sometimes spoken in conversation, in enunciatory terms, and sometimes it was sung. Most often it was sung. So today, if you want to create a new art form in which you use traditional Bharatnatyam or traditional Kuchipudi, in which you make the dancers speak the dialogue, and the dialogues is spoken in a manner that it is part of drama, then you will have an entirely new Rupaka. Now this is done, I know, partly in dance forms of Kerala and Kudiyattam and Kathakali, but it's done very, very marginally. It is not an important feature. It is not as if it's a 3-hour play, then there is a large amount of spoken script or sung script also. So I'm talking about this. But this was the practice in ancient times. And it is described very clearly as to in which swara, which rasa would be performed by the actor. Now this is something which you can easily revive in creating a new art form. And some of the innovators who have danced ancient plays like Shakuntalam or Swapnavasal Dattam, they can really make it more dramatic by speaking the dialogue. Instead of making it into a ballet or a dance drama, you take it back to Natya, in which the Vachik is used as dialogue, it is used as dramatic dialogue. So these are things which are so extensively given to us in Natyashastra that it is not difficult to revive them. And also how they are to be sung, Magadhi, etc., which were used. And almost till 8th century, it was a living, actual language of the people. Of course, after I think 8th century or so, when people wrote plays, they still continued to write in Ardha Magadhi, etc. When Ardha Magadhi had fallen out of practice, it had been replaced by newer languages and modern Indian languages by 11th, 12th century. So this was the historical situation. But the fact remains that ancient Indian drama was a multilingual drama. It was not a monolingual drama. You see, today the modern Indian finds it very difficult to digest this fact that his ancestors never had a monolingual drama. That there was nothing like Hindi drama, Malayali drama, Tamil drama, Bengali drama, nothing like that in ancient India or even medieval India. Theatre was always in various languages. Now, I think that if you want to revive ancient Indian theatre, the spirit of it, and if you wish to learn from Natyashastra, we can progress in steps towards multilingual drama again. We have a multilingual society in India. And in theatre, because you see so many things, you don't have to understand each and every word which is spoken or which is sung, because you enjoy so many things. You enjoy the angik, you enjoy the music, you enjoy the acting, many things. So even if you miss some parts of the word, still you will be able to do it. Now this is another factor in which multilingual theatre can be brought into practice. It cannot be like in ancient times where 4 or 5 languages were used. It can be a theatre in which 2 or 3 languages be used. And I think for a modern Indian, languages like the language of the state or the place where he or she belongs, like Malayalam for you people, along with English, along with Hindi, along with Kannada, is something which a large number of your audience would understand. Similarly, a formula can be made through practice and through generation of experiments in North India to have such combination. But that would result in a greater cohesiveness and exchanges of Indian theatre. So I guess I have taken around 45 minutes of your time. I can certainly go on and share so many other ideas that I have, but I think it would be more appropriate if I can now invite questions and start a discussion. So thank you very much for giving me a patient learning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your scholarly talk on Natyashastra, its contemporary relevance, etc. Sir, now it's time for discussion. I welcome all participants to join discussion.
Yes, please. Ask questions, and even if you think that my ideas were very much off the mark, then say so, and we can have a discussion on that, you know. Because my fundamental notion is that there was a certain spirit behind what is written and practiced in ancient theatre. And that spirit has not disappeared in India. That art and that spirit and that cohesiveness still exists.
Sir, may I ask one question, Murali Madhavan?
Sir?
May I ask a question?
Yes, of course, sir.
Yeah. Have you seen any of the contemporary Sanskrit dramas from Kerala? Especially if people like the great theatrists like Kavalam Narayana Panikar, because you know him very well.
Yeah.
He has directed more than half a dozen or a dozen Sanskrit dramas and in the contemporary stage. And he has given a different version, a different intonation, a different way of approach looking at the entire Sanskrit drama. So,
yes, certainly.
what is your opinion of such experiments?
You see,
as a theatre
yes.
theorist, I want to hear from you.
Yes, thank you, sir. Panikarji was a very good friend of mine. I followed his work for maybe 30-40 years. In fact, his last major production in Delhi, which was a story of retelling of story of Shakuntala, I knew it very well. He in fact invited my cooperation, and I attended something like 7 or 8 production sessions, you know, when he was training his. Of course, he created a contemporary idiom. Because when you create a contemporary idiom, then it is seen with a great attention and appreciation. Now, of course, he was not trying to stick to every rule as given in Natyashastra, and nobody should. As a matter of fact, your basic problem is to make a production which the audience can immediately enjoy. Because the audience is not interested in the rules according to which you are making. And so many rules cannot operate. As a matter of fact, Natyashastra in 4 of its chapters ends with verses which say that, look, I have seen these practices in my time. Now if you see something which I have left out, please add. As a matter of fact, the last line of Natyashastra in its 36th or 37th chapter, whatever how you divide it, is this, in the Baroda edition, that please add things which others are doing, which great Mahanatas are practicing. So Panikar was certainly a very innovative man, a wonderful man, and I was a great admirer of his work. Now what I am saying, and I used to talk about this with him also a lot, that you see, so far attempts to recreate ancient drama have been based from region, because it is in a region that you know the Angik Abhinay, because it is in a particular region that a certain style, whether it is Bharatnatyam, Kuchipudi or any other style of Kudiyattam, etc., that survives. And in that language you try to present. I am talking about something wider, by including 2 or 3 languages. You see, one of the biggest casualty for so-called Sanskrit theatre is, and I think this is where my dear friends who are Sanskrit Pandits are to be, shouldn't say it, to be blamed, that they want the whole thing to be in Sanskrit only. Now you know, as scholars, it was not in Sanskrit. In ancient times only part of it was in Sanskrit. Rest was in Prakrit. So why can it not be in Prakrit today? Even if you have to perform it, let us say in Chennai or in Trivandrum, then you have in Malayalam as well as in a couple other languages. And you will have a bigger audience. More people will come to see it. So you have Sanskrit also. But that you will have Sanskrit even where Prakrit was spoken once upon a time, in order to have the glorious satisfaction of performing Sanskrit theatre, this has actually harmed practical Sanskrit theatre. You see, theatre is something which requires immediate communication. And you are also going against the spirit of Bharat Muni. Bharat Muni never wanted you to perform Avigyan Shakuntalam only in Sanskrit. So even the fisherman is made to speak Sanskrit now. If Bharat Muni had seen such modern productions, he would have been horrified. He would say, this is not Lokanukriti. This is not something which happens in Loka. So if you see the spirit behind his Siddhanta, his different Siddhantas, if you see the spirit of them and find a new contemporary language for it, we will be closer to him and we will be more dramatic. We will be more practical. I think it's a matter of experiment, and right kind of experiment will bring very big results.
Sir, here I want to mention one thing.
Yeah.
That you know the Kerala theatre, the classical Sanskrit theatre, Kudiyattam. It is known as Sanskrit theatre, and it has got all recognitions as a Sanskrit theatre, but it is a theatre of multilinguals.
Yeah, exactly. I know that.
There you can see Malayalam.
Yeah.
There you can see Tamil. There you can see another kind of Tamil called Nambyar Tamil.
Yeah, and there is,
you can see several varieties of Prakrit.
Yeah, and there is Tulu.
Apart from that, it may be something new for you, I will tell you. In Kudiyattam, the Chakyars, they are very brilliant. They have found out a tribal language. Even now it is not named. Even now it is not named by name.
Yes.
But such a tribal language is being used by Shurpanaka.
Yeah. So they are following the spirit of Natyashastra.
Yeah.
They are following the spirit.
I really agree with that.
Yes, and that is what I want for rest of India to follow. They have a living example in Kerala, and they can put into practice what is being practiced in Kerala.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have to come to these conclusions. Having seen, of course, Kerala theatre, I have spent many years seeing all kinds of art forms here, including Theyyams. Once upon a time, I used to come and see all kinds of Theyyams in the Navaratra in Kasargod.
North Kerala.
Right, in Kasargod area and all that. I've been there several times. The tradition can be revitalized very easily. It is something.
Well, in the modern theatre, mostly the directors and the producers of the drama,
Yes.
they are mainly depending on one single language.
Exactly.
This is going back to. This is not going back to our tradition. It is not that you are depending upon Natyashastra. Natyashastra has opened all the doors.
Exactly.
All types of freedom.
Exactly.
To directors.
Because the fundamental principle in Natyashastra is Lokanu Kirtanam.
Lokanu Kirtanam, yes.
So what is in Loka you follow. You practice, you recreate, Anukirta. And you have to do a Punarsrishti of it, Anukriti of it. So Natya has to be a Lokanukriti.
Yes.
And it is in that principle I suggest, I am trying to persuade some of my disciples to produce that kind of theatre. And you will be happy to know that they are doing some experiments in that direction. And in maybe 2-3 years, something very solid will be presented before the people, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The people can ask questions. If I am seeing Professor Shashi Rekha in the screen. Professor Shashi Rekha is a learned professor from Hyderabad, from Osmania University, and a great disciple of great Sanskrit scholar, Professor Sri Ramachandrudu. Whenever I see her, I am seeing her professor through her. Professor Shashi Rekha, please give your comments. You have not unmuted. Please unmute.
Ask to Sarah lecturing.
We are not hearing. Professor
Hello?
Shashireka, we are not hearing.
Hello?
Yes, now we are hearing. Yeah. Hearing.
Namaskar to all, particularly to Bharat Gupta sir. You have defined his name also. Sir, Bharat sir, I am very happy you have enlightened us, because how really this can be again rejuvenated, that is a fundamental thing you have done. Excellent, and because we could get so many ideas. And here in Andhra Pradesh, actually these theatres, they are performed very well in Telugu language. Particularly that Krishna Devaraya's court poets, Bhuvana Vijayam, 8 poets, that is almost like based on Sanskrit drama. It is well organized with Telugu poems and all. So in Telugu language, it is done well. But here, just if I know, I am expressing my view. Sir, theatre means theatre, Indian theatre. You see, can't we talk about this modern movies, because the Chalanachitra is based upon Natyashastra basically. Formerly it is based on that. And later on, as you say, now Natakam, Natika, Prakaranam, they are gone. Only like Prahasanam, etc. or that is Bhana, these are going. So, is there anything to comment about that? Sorry if it is out of topic, you can excuse me.
No.
If not, please,
No.
I expect some answer from you, sir.
Yeah, no,
That's it.
you see, I only gave 2-3 examples from Prahasana, Bhana, and I was going to give example from Vithi also. Today, what you see as stand-up comedy is an ancient Vithi. The Rupak called Vithi, that was a stand-up comedy because it was Ekaharya. It was done by one person. But even Natak and Rupak, by making adjustments, can be done. You see, what is the essential feature of Natak and Rupak and Prakaran? That the vritti called Kaishiki has to be dominant in it. Now, Kaishiki vritti will be dominant if it is a love story. As a matter of fact, all over the world, there are only 2 kinds of stories. Either love stories or war stories, isn't it? या तो प्रेम होता है या युद्ध होता है और कोई तीसरी कहानी नहीं होती दुनिया में कहीं भी. So, if you make a contemporary story which is going to be dominated by Shringar. Now, Shringar need not mean exactly in the Ashtanayika mode. You see, because Shringara is a bhava. So, if you make that the dominant bhava, then you are writing a modern Nataka or you are writing a modern Prakarana. In the ancient times, the difference between Natak and Prakaran was that the hero of Prakaran was a Vaishya. I mean, although he could be a Brahman by birth, but then he had to be a Vaishya by profession. You see, otherwise he could not be Rasik or he could not go to a courtesan, a Veshmagraha. According to the ancient systems, Brahmanas were not allowed to visit courtesans. So, this kind of classification will undergo adjustments, will undergo change, many things will be done, and you will have a new art form. See, the biggest example of rejuvenation of theatre by taking classical theatre as a model comes from Europe. After all, Shakespeare and Marlowe and Racine and all these people, they read the classical ancient Greek plays, but they had never seen those plays. And when they wrote their plays, they left out so many things from the ancient art form, because the ancient Greek art form was full of dance, it was full of music, it was full of costume, it was full of so many things which was more like Natyashastra and not like modern theatre. But they created a new art form. Now we don't have to create something so radically different, but we have to innovate. There should be a pratibha in recreating, which is very contemporary, which is very modern. And because that's what people will watch. They will of course watch Shakuntala and Vasavdatta and Mrichikadikam, but they will like new stories. They want new itivrittas. And all the Dashrupakas and new Dashrupakas need to be created. This is my view.
Sir, I expect my friend Dr. Subrayadu, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Central University, I saw him in the screen, whether he is available. We want to hear from him something. He's a Sanskrit professor. basically. Professor Subbarayadu?
Yes, sir.
Battery.
He is
ओके कर दी
Yeah.
इसकी कहाँ से बदलूं मुझे नहीं आती और कर
And sir, there is another question from Renu Paul from Varanasi.
Yes,
In the
sir.
chat box.
Yes, sir.
आती नहीं फिर से निकाल
Can you please?
Can you see in the box?
Where?
Can you see in the box?
Yes, I am reading it.
Yeah.
The question is, I guess what I want to know is, does Bharat Muni rules dictate the performer and the performance, and to what extent, or is the Natyashastra to be understood as an analytical text per se, universal yesterday, today and tomorrow? So this is a question from Renu Paul, a very good question indeed. Extremely contemporary, very often asked. You see, we have this kind of a wrong notion about a Shastra. A Shastra was not a set of rules. No Shastra was prescriptive. You think Ayurveda was prescriptive? All Shastras were based upon observation and recording the observation. So when people saw that this is how a great Vaidya is curing the disease by using certain kinds of vanaspati, then they will record it. That you make this combination of vanaspati for Vayu dosh, or this combination of Aushadha for Pitta dosh, and you write it down. Then others can follow it for their convenience. But this is not an order. This is only a record of something which has happened, so that you don't have to reinvest the wheel, so that you don't have to make the wheel again and again. So all Shastras are that way, and Bharat Muni is exactly that way. If you see some of my videos on the internet, then I have shown the growth of the technique of theatre from Vedic Yajna to Bharat Muni, and then later on how it changed further. But these were all experiments done in different places, and they were incorporated into theatre. So, like the Angik Abhinay is a combination of the Shaiva tradition and the Brahman or the Brahma tradition, the tradition of Brahma, which means the Vedic Swara. The Vedic Swar, the three kind of Udatta, Anudatta, Swarit, and then the Samagan where the 7 notes are used. It is from that you develop further the art of Gandhara. Because when you make all these 7 swaras full of alankaras and tanas and shruti bheda, then it is no longer Samagan. Then it is Gandharva or Sangeet. So you see, this is a constant growth, and the Shastras record that growth. The purpose of Shastra is to record the innovations that have been done by people at different times, so that posterity can use it. Then the great innovators, they add things into it. After all, when Abhinav Gupta said that let there be Shantarasa, he opened the door. According to Bharat Muni, Shantarasa is not dramatic. But then he wanted people in theatre to explore Shantarasa. And then some people started exploring Madhura Rasa. So the conditions were different. These were conditions for a sampradaya. Like the Vaishnava Krishna Bhakti Sampradaya wanted Madhura Rasa, because their whole Upasana was based on that. But in the time of Bharat Muni, theatre was not within the precincts of an Upasana Paddhati. or a sampradaya. It was out in the open with all kinds of people, children and learned people and all that watching, you see. Panditas watching, acharyas watching, women watching, uneducated people watching. So theatre was different audience. But later on, in medieval times, theatre becomes located within a certain sampradaya, bhakti sampradaya. That's how it survived. Otherwise it would not have survived. The great art was preserved that way. So one has to understand the changes, and Shastra is constantly open to change. There was a great scholar in Meerut called Gairola, and he wrote an Abhinav Natyashastra, and he wrote it in Sanskrit. So he incorporated many modern things in it. Many kind of modern theatre he mentions it.
Dr. Gupta-ji, regarding the problems of communications in the theatre, problem of communication of emotions in the theatre, you told that the Bharata was not agreeing Shantarasa in the theatre.
Yeah.
What may be the reason for that?
You see, practically speaking, I mean, I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, but but you see, if you want to depict Shantarasa on stage, what will be your Angik Abhinay? Only like this, or like, Dhyana Mudra. So you do these 3 or 4 mudras, you show a bit of Khatka Mukha like this, and that's the end of Shantarasa. Because Shantarasa is an inner experience. It is not an outer experience. There is no Abhinay in Shantarasa. Abhinay is something which is a bhava.
Sai bhava is Shantarasa. The predominant rasa is Shanta.
Yeah, because...
And the Shantarasa is being depicted even by Kalidasa in a very beautiful manner, and we could enjoy that Shantarasa. Then how you say there is some stumbling block in between in the stage?
You see, here, the thing is that you can enjoy a particular, you can make a Sanchari Bhav into a Sthai Bhav for a while. Like Nirved. You see, basically Shantarasa can be made into a rasa only if Nirved is relied upon. So you have to make Nirved so dominant. You have to show Nirved, for 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. These ancient plays were done for 6 or 7 days. They were never completed, as you know, in 1 day or 2.5 hours. Now, it is not possible to stretch Nirved for such a long time. And because you can do it in flashes. You can do it in certain portions. I have not read that play, Bhartrihari, by Bhartrihari.
No, only for challenging some scholars and for some discussions I had gone through that.
Okay, I will like to.
Finally, I had to disagree with Abhinav Gupta.
So you see, even if you, for instance, I am a great admirer of Bhartrihari, his Shringar Shatak and Vairagya Shatak and Niti Shatak. Now, when you read even Shringar Shatak of Bhartrihari, I at least believe that the Sthai Bhav in Shringar Shatak is not Shringar but Nirved.
I really agree. Yes.
When I read his Shringar Shatakam, the Sthai Bhav there is Nirved.
Yeah.
He comes back to that all the time. And as a matter of fact, Shringar and Vairagya Shataka, the Shataka Dvayi, they make one unit.
Yes. Yes.
Now
It
this
is a good it is a very good interpretation.
Yeah. Now this can be possible in, like Kavya, I mean the Mukta Kavya or a Lagu Kavya, but it is not possible in Natya. See, now on this question, I'll just make one small final comment. All the literary people, they agree with Abhinav Gupta's Shantarasa, but all the theatre people, they agree with Bharat Muni. Because it's a matter of practical art.
No, that is why Mammada Bhatta, who was a great admirer of Abhinav Anandavardhana and Abhinav Gupta, even though he admires him, he has made a different standpoint. Shantomi Navamorasa. So that it is only in Kavya, not in Nataka.
Exactly. I mean, thank you.
He has given that.
Yeah, because thank you that a great Purva Acharya has said what I am now trying to say. Thank you.
डॉक्टर विद्यार्थी क्या बात आपको कहा चार को तो हमारे मंत्री बैठते थे
देखिए ना उन्होंने 560 बताया ओके
ऐसे बगैर
Please have more questions and make live the discussion.
So I think that was private conversation. Yes, sir.
Professor Subbarayudu has come.
Right.
Oh, okay. Thank you. We are happy to hear him, Professor Subbarayudu.
Also we have we appreciate the gracious presence of Professor Radha Vallabhai Tripathi.
Radha Vallabhai Tripathi.
Yes.
Oh, namaskar, sir. Tripathi sir, namaskar. Tripathi sir, namaskar. Tripathi sir, mic is mute.
I think so.
Tripathi sir, please request him to open.
Yes, I will do that.
Please request him to open the unmuting. We are blessed that Professor Radha Vallabhai Tripathi and such great scholars are participating in this our session and making the function unforgettable one.
I think there was some technical issue. He could not join.
You not join? Okay.
No, he joined, but he left also.
Oh, maybe some connection problem.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think questions are still so many because we are talking about the life.
So there is a question from Narayanan.
Yes. Please ask him. He can directly ask.
It's already there in the chat box.
Okay, I'll see the chat box, please, and then security at. I don't know how to. I don't see it in the chat box here.
You could not see. Professor, Dr. Jyoti, can you
Read out,
Yeah,
please.
read that question?
Yeah. The question is, according to Dhanyaloga, Mahabharata, full of actions, is based on Sanda.
Punyaloka.
Yeah.
Ah.
Mahabharata, full of actions, is based on Sanda.
So Shanda has been recognized by Anandavardhana. Then
You see,
how your standpoint you can clarify.
yeah. Now look, here again, the question is very simple. You take 1 month or 6 months or 2 years or 5 years to read Mahabharata. And after that, maybe most people would experience Shantarasa, or they would like to, end up with the great Upadesh that Bhishma gives to Yudhishthira, or whatever, something like that. And I accept this. Now, I have also read a work, a foreign work, which is very huge, not as big as Mahabharata, called War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I took 6 months to read it. And it is about war also. And believe me that after reading War and Peace, just like Mahabharata, you feel Shantarasa. But
that may be momentary.
yes, that's right, sir. You are right. And secondly, that is not performance. That is not prayogatmak. Because
Descriptive.
and Mahabharata is always performed on the stage about a few things. You take a drishtanta or a prasanga from Mahabharata, like Draupadi Chirharan, or some other that going to the Vana, or the Shapath of Karna, or how Karna gave away his kundal. So you take an episode from Mahabharata. That alone can be dramatic. Bharat Muni makes it very clear that a natak has to have a itivritta. And that itivritta will be according to the nayak, and the nayak will be chosen according to a particular rasa which you want as the sthai rasa of the whole story or the whole play. Now you can't do this in Mahabharata. You can show Veer rasa, you can show Karna as a great Dani, or you can show the death of Karna and have Karuna rasa there. But whatever you show over a period of whatever is the period according to your performance cycle, it is not so huge as Mahabharata. So I think these speculations, they don't take into account the difference in the genre or the format. Mahabharata is a Mahakavya. It is an itihas. Whereas a natak or a rupak, it is a rupak. And nowhere in the world you can have a play which goes on and on and on for several years. Or you condense then Mahabharata into 2 hours or 3 hours. And Mahabharata has so many nayaka. 25 to 30 nayakas. A itivritta has to have one nayak. Otherwise there will be no rupak. Otherwise there will be no story. So they are very different things. So you can have Shantras in Mahabharata, I agree. No dispute about that. But not on stage. Unless you do a slice of Mahabharata.
Sir, one question. You said that according to the ancient dramatic tradition, the approach or the methodology should be yogan dharmi. I understand that it means the methodology is to be integrated. Different kinds of things are to be integrated according to that concept. But there is a belief that the dramatic concepts from modern realism actually developed later in modern times.
Yes.
But it is understood that according to our ancient dramatic tradition and the theories of Bharat Muni, there were 2 trends, Logadharmi and Natyadharmi. Then these Logadharmi actually predominant was Natyadharmi. Even then, the seeds of realism can you see in our ancient dramatic the concepts or the concepts of Bharat. That is, I want to understand. Right.
Yes. Thank you, sir. This is also a very, very frequently asked question. I have discussed this in detail in about 6-7 pages in my book Dramatic Concept, and I have also given quotations from Abhinav Bharati. Now you see, when they say Lokadharmi, when Bharat Muni says Lokadharmi, what does he mean? He means that things which are happening in Loka. Now anything which is happening in Natya is also happening in Loka. There is nothing done on stage which is not happening in the world outside. Isn't it? But everything which is done on the stage is not happening outside. There are so many things which are happening on the stage which are totally artificial. They don't exist in Lok, not even in Trailokya. They exist only on stage. Like, I put my hand like this and I speak very loud, and you believe that I am only whispering. I put my hand like this and I pretend that I am whispering, but I have to speak loud so that people sitting at the last row, they can. Now this is Natya Dharmi.
Your soliloquy should be heard by other people.
Exactly. So this murmuring, this whispering, or everything is not, many of these things are Natya Dharmi. Now Kaishiki Vritti or Hela or so many things in Shringar, they are made to such an extent and in an artistic manner that they exist only in Natya. That is Natya Dharma. Now when things which are shown from outside, which are common, that is Lok Dharmi, but that does not mean that it is done in realistic manner. You see, realism is only 150 years old in the history of world theatre. Even in England there was no realism. I mean, I'll give you an example. If you listen to a dialogue of Shakespeare today, when you go to England, then that's not how it was done in Shakespeare's time. Today, if you go to Stratford upon Avon and you listen to Merchant of Venice opening line, "It's sooth, I don't know how I am so sad, but it wearies me, it doesn't." But in Shakespeare's time it was, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad."
Great. Really. This is the crux of that.
So, now you do the same thing today. Now in Natyashastra, what is Kaishiki? Kaishiki is done by the great Nata. It takes years and years of training, to make your nostrils go like this, to go your bhru karma, your griva karma, or your nritta hastas. They are a product of many years of training. They are only found in Natya. That is Natya Dharmi. So this is the fundamental difference. Unfortunately, this mistake was made by some great scholars. I don't know how it happened, but I don't want to name them because they are very great, and some very great scholars had made this mistake of writing Natya Dharmi realist, conventional, and this thing realistic. And to a couple of these great scholars I pointed this out, but they said, "Look, this got printed 30 years ago. I can't do anything about it now. But what you are saying is right. So these things happen. I mean, one has to understand.
Wonderful. Sir, wonderful explanation, wonderful doubts also.
Yeah.
Doubts
And
also wonderful.
how the what? No,
And
we have seen,
answers are...
we have seen how the Vachika changes when the Shakespeare dialogue comes.
Yeah.
Shakespeare dialogue comes, how Vachika,
That's
according
right.
to the situation, it changes. And the
that's right.
impact of it.
That's why.
Thank you for your
That's why I entered.
Thank you,
I
sir,
entered
for
because
your
that is a hats off to that expression, sir. The Shakespeare's, that Vachikam is of course wonderful.
See,
I
also,
do agree.
yeah, also Abhinav Gupta, he explains it. In that 13th chapter where the distinction is made between Natyadharmi and Lokadharmi, in his Abhinav Bharati he says that an old story which is popular is Lokadharmi. Like the story of Shakuntala in Mahabharata, till the time of Kalidasa was Lokadharmi.
Yeah.
But Kalidasa makes the story different.
Logadharmi. It made Logadharmi.
So he makes it Natyadharmi.
Yeah.
But today Kalidasa is Lokadharmi and Mahabharata is Natyadharmi because nobody reads Mahabharata.
And sir, moreover, Mahabharata is a kavya.
Ha.
When it is done into pieces drama form, as you said, then all these Bharatanatyam rules will apply.
Yeah.
But as a whole, in that Ganyaloka, the rasa is decided based on kavyatva,
Yeah.
not rupa.
No.
Because Ramayana's Karuna rasa, Mahabharata's Shanta rasa, it is in the context of Mahakavya, not drama. There was no drama. Actually, Shanta rasa,
See,
Kavya only talked about. That was not pertaining to drama.
Professor Shaniaka, you are right. I think one thing I want to add, not a single Rajatarishan has made any attempt to what we call to criticize, to write a critic on a drama which has a dominant sentiment as called rasa, Angi rasa. Nobody has done.
Yeah.
Sarikara and other people, they speak about kavyas and nagaras and give examples. But as a whole, you take a complete Shagundala, complete Swapnavasu Datta, complete text and how the according to Sandhi Sanjenga, how it becomes Angarasa and Angirasa. These explanations done, nobody has done it so far.
Nice. Yes.
see, I think
Yeah.
Abhinav Gupta was the last man who had the total vision.
Yeah, that is there.
Abhinav Gupta is the last man. And I think at his time, practical theatre was going back. Although in Kashmir, practical theatre continued for another 600 to 700 years. And even during the period of Salahuddin and some Muslim kings, it was still performed in the cities. But in rest of India, it disappeared. You see, look, in North India, it disappeared in 11th century. There was no theatre in 11th century performed after 11th century. After the Delhi Sultanate, when Qutubuddin Aibak becomes the king, there was no theatre till the British came. You see, we don't talk about these historical conditions because we think it is politically incorrect, but the fact is something different. History is something different. So that's why people in the whole northern region, they lost any idea of they lost the whole idea of theatre very early.
Okay. Very good. Any other questions? Now we are nearing 5:30. Any other questions to be asked? Any commissions or omissions? Anything? Any comment is to be made?
Only congratulations to you, sir, Murali Madhavanji.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We are happy. We are happy that even professors from different states, they have, even from outside India, they have attended our program and asked very sensible questions and participated in discussion. So it is a big thing. That is what we need and what we intend to. And our main motto is that people should be benefited. So our students should be benefited. Yes. Tattva. Yeah. Surely.
Yeah, that's so nice to see you.
Even when we teach 1,000 times or 100 times or 1,000 times a text, still there are some